Welcome to the HBCU Season Recap presented by Allstate. I'm Harry Lyles, and I am joined by the great Tiffany Green and the great Jay Walker. Together, we are going to take a look back at a great season of HBCU football and give you all the information you need to be ready for the Cricket Celebration Bowl between Jackson State and South Carolina State in the greatest city in the world, Atlanta, Georgia. Tiffany, Jay, what were some of the most memorable moments of this season for you guys?
Well, I think there was so much uncertainty about what was to come for this season. Could Florida A&M repeat? But to me, it was the fact that Division II programs stepped up in a major way. Shout out to Johnson C. Smith and Miles College, along with Virginia Union. They don't always get the love, right, because of the FCS level, but I think those were some really great moments because they had some shining examples of how great they could be at their level. But also, we're seeing what we wanted to see, two outstanding teams throughout the year. Some surprises because who was going to take hold of the West? That was one of those memorable moments because Southern really stepped up in a major way that many people didn't necessarily expect to see. And then very young coaches, to me, now getting their opportunity to shine on the biggest stage, and TC Taylor and Chinnisberry. They've been around the block, but now they get an opportunity to show just how good they are as head coaches.
I would follow up with the new coaches, the ones that stepped up. I mean, nobody knew what to expect from Chinnisberry taking over at South Carolina State, replacing a legend. And then you take a look at Southern University. There was so much turmoil at Southern at the end of last year. They came internally and gave Terrence Graves his very first coaching job. He's been coaching for 30 plus years, always as an assistant. What did he do in year one? He took Southern to the SWAC championship game. I think those two coaches right there were the biggest surprises of the season.
Yeah, and those are some heavy lifts to be done, and they did them very well. Let's get to some of the biggest storylines of the season, starting off with the All-MEAC and All-SWAC teams that were announced. Which players from these lists were some of your favorites from this season, guys? Tiff, we could start with you.
Well, I got to say Mulligan, right? The SWAC Offensive Player of the Year, one of the best in the country, averaging just about 6.5 yards per carry. He tacked on yet another 100-yard rushing performance in that SWAC championship game. He was a guy who really stood out, came in under TC Taylor last year, entered the season, missed the first 2 games coming off of an injury. And what did he do? Just help run away with things in the SWAC. He was the guy this year that stood out to me for SWAC teams.
I think if you want to go on the offensive side of the ball, stay in there. Mulligan was good. He was consistent all year long. But the most explosive player we saw in all of HBCU football was probably Giovanni Gibson, the wide receiver from the University of Arkansas Pine Bluff. Pine Bluff didn't win a lot of games, but it wasn't because of him. He was a targeted guy every game. At one point during the season, he was averaging 25 yards per catch. So the one thing that was going to happen, he was going to get his numbers. And Giovanni Gibson was a special talent. Arkansas Pine Bluff, hey, they're trending in the right direction. However, Giovanni Gibson stood out ahead of the whole bunch.
25 yards per catch. That's math that even I can do. We got to get that guy the football. You guys are both experts. So we had you make a few predictions at the beginning of the season when we were on Bristol. Some of those hit. Some of them, not quite as much. But now is the time to answer for those preseason picks. Let's play a game that we'll call How'd That Work Out? First up, let's look at Tiff's preseason top 5. It was Jackson State, Alabama State, Howard, NCCU, and FAMU. Tiff, what happened to your preseason picks? Lay it out for us.
Well, look, I got one of the top teams that made it to the HBCU National Championship game in Jackson State, so got that right. Then after that, I think some of my teams still were among the top 5 or among the top teams in HBCU football. North Carolina Central, obviously, in that mix. Alabama State looking good. My Howard pick came back to bite me, but they were the MEAC champions from a season ago, so you had to kind of feel confident with what Larry Scott had there. And then Florida A&M, a 7-5 season, disappointing for many in Tallahassee. Those 2 teams were last in the Celebration Bowl. So I got 3 out of the 5 right. Not bad, right? My percentages are in the positive.
That's about how I did in school, and I still made it here, right? So it's pretty good. Jay, you made your picks for the Celebration Bowl. You got half of it right. You got Jackson State, but what happened to your Bison this year, man?
First and foremost, Howard University is an academic institution. So that's what I have to say whenever the football team not winning games, we just always fall back to our academics. So we're an academic institution. But I think the Bison let me down a little bit. They had all the star power coming back. I mean, the big name guys were coming, but I think replacing Quentin Williams, who was a quarterback that started there for 5 years, was probably a little bit too much for Howard University to overcome. They missed his stability there. Still one of the most talented teams you'll see in all of HBCU football. But the Bison let me down. Yard got us. The yard got us. You got a lot of distractions around that yard. I don't think they handled the success well and the expectations well. So I'm gonna blame it on the yard. But let's not forget.
Wait a minute. I'm not going for that, blaming it on the yard. That's such an easy excuse for you, Jay. You like to default to that all the time. How about Elijah Williams? He was on that All-MEAC first team list, huh? How about Caden Hyde, one of those wide receivers, Eric Phoenix? I mean, these are guys who took it to Howard when they played them this season.
Yeah, but we're talking about Howard. You asked me why the Bison didn't show up. I told you, Yard got us. Yard got them. It's going to happen. Yard and academics.
Hey, prioritizing the books is never a bad thing. One of the final institutions still putting the student athlete, right? Thank you. Yeah. Hey, look, it's all good, man. Let's look ahead to next year. Which teams do you guys think are trending upward?
I'm going to say Morgan State. I mean, Morgan State is a team that defensively they can play with anybody, right? They've got one of the best defenses out there. And if Coach Damian Wilson figures out a way to get an offense, then Morgan State's going to be trouble. They've got some talented guys there. The defensive side of the ball, they're very sound. Offensively, though, they've got to figure out a way to get some firepower. And if they do, it's going to be trouble.
I think Damian Wilson has done a fantastic job, and we're just waiting for the Bears to kind of take that next step up. And perhaps next season we'll see that. But also, I think Texas Southern made a splash, right? Chris Dishman, not necessarily a lot was expected from the first-year head coach for the Tigers. Some had a question mark or scratch their head about his hire. But what did he do? He came out at the gate, made a big win or had a big win rather in one of their all-time classics. But then also they finished middle of the road in the SWAC West. And so you cannot overlook what Chris Dishman did there. I think also another one of those teams, Southern, we talked about them before, right? Terrence Graves and the job that he did down there in Baton Rouge and exceeding expectations. So I expect the SWAC West to be all the more interesting as it has been since the realignment to be up for grabs next year.
Now, Jay, I'm going to ask you to give a team a reality check here. Who do you think is trending downward and why?
A couple are going to come out to mind. I'm going to say Alabama A&M. You know, it was only like 4 years ago during the COVID year, they were probably trending up in the highest direction possible, best player of the conference. Things of that nature. Had a coach that was going, and the end of the year, it just kind of fell apart for Alabama A&M. Not able to achieve that during the regular season, and that's what happened. Coaches get let go, so it's easy to pick on a team that had a coach get let go. But I think Alabama A&M was one of them, and Prairie View A&M. I mean, let's look at Prairie View A&M. You kind of wonder what's taking place there. I mean, a coach takes you to the SWAC championship game a season ago, and a year later, he doesn't know how to coach. So now all of a sudden, you're going to replace him. And we're not talking about they got blown out. They had a couple losses that you just didn't expect, losing to Texas Southern, losing Arkansas Pine Bluff. But, I mean, you know, Bubba McDowell had a squad out there that was competitive every week, just didn't win those games. And so you're going to replace him. Well, what are you going to do next? He took you to the SWAC championship a season ago. I think that's trending in the wrong direction. You're causing some unnecessary chaos there.
No argument there for me. I mean, and Jay, you've already spoken to your Howard Bison, so we don't want to beat the dead horse there.
Are you saying the Bison are trending? Are you saying the Bison are trending in the wrong direction?
I think so. I mean, you think about they were MEAC champions last year. They were in the Celebration Bowl, and this year now Larry Scott has his team 4-8, only one win in conference play. Yes, that is going in the wrong direction.
Academic institution.
I was going to say we're trending towards the textbooks. You know, that's clearly just the theme here. Let's get to some of the news and stories surrounding HBCU head football coaches this season. TC Taylor out at Jackson State, 11-2 in his second season as head coach post Dion. Chennis Berry, Jay, you mentioned earlier, 9-2 in his first season, replacing the legendary Buddy Pugh. Eddie George led Tennessee State to their first FCS playoffs. I know First Take had a lot of fun with them earlier this season. Willie Simmons, Tiff, former FAMU head coach, left to coach running backs at Duke. He was recently named the head coach at FIU, and Jerry Mack, former NCCU head coach, was named the head coach at Kennesaw State, up 75 here in Atlanta. Do Simmons and Mack hires open the door for more HBCU coaches to go to FBS, or does it seem like it's more of a revolving door now, at least for these guys? Tiff, what do you think?
Well, I think you're going to see it's reciprocal, right? So you saw Larry Scott come from the FBS level and coach now at Howard University. Florida A&M and NCCU had great coaches that went on, tried to find greater opportunities, and now they get to lead their programs and show what they can do. So I think it is a revolving door, but it also just demonstrates the level of coaching that exist in the MEAC and the SWAC, and that they're capable to coach at any level. And I hope that both Jerry Mack and Willie Simmons continue to keep that door open so that more can come through to just prove how good they are. I mean, we saw Deion Sanders start out at Jackson State and what he's done now at Colorado. So it just goes to speak to the level of competition and coaching that we see at these HBCUs.
And I think it'll be a revolving door, like Tiffany said. I mean, I go back to when Ron Cooper, he came from Temple and went to Alabama State there. Jay Hopkins was the head coach at Alcorn State, and then he went to Southern Miss to take over as head coach. So the key is now we're going to be judged by success. And that's all these coaches want. Just judge me by success. Give us a level playing field. And I think we'll see there's some talented minds that have been in the HBCU ranks for years, and now the rest of the nation is going to get to see them.
No, without a doubt. And before we get out of here, we would like to take a moment to remember Medrick Burnett Jr., who played linebacker at Alabama A&M. He sustained a head injury during the annual Magic City Classic against Alabama State on October 26th and passed away on November 29th. He was a redshirt freshman from Lakewood, California, who joined Alabama A&M over the summer. And after starting his career at Grambling, he was 20 years old. The ESPN family would like to send our thoughts and prayers out to the family during this difficult time. Let's take a look at the Good Hands players presented by Allstate. Our Good Hands player is Irv Mulligan, a running back from Jackson State. The senior from Beaufort, South Carolina, showed out with career highs in carries, yards per carry, and touchdowns this season. He put the team on his back and carried Jackson State all the way to the Celebration Bowl. Congrats, Irv, on a great season. We now welcome in ESPN Draft and college football analyst and NCCU alum Jordan Reid to the show. We got two quarterbacks on the show now. Jordan, how's it going?
It's only one quarterback. Only one quarterback.
Here we go. Jay already starting. I ain't even been on here 5 seconds. I think he's still mad at that helmet that's over my shoulder, that NCCU helmet. That's all.
He might be. He might be. We just talked about Irv Mulligan from Jackson State, who's having a phenomenal season. He's absolutely one of the best players in HBCU football. We love the work you do in covering draft prospects for ESPN. So tell us, who are some of the guys playing HBCU football right now that you think NFL teams should be keeping an eye on?
Well, I will say this. I think this is one of the more talented HBCU classes that we have seen in quite some time. And just starting at the top with Carson Vincent, the offensive tackle out of Alabama A&M, who I think was the best offensive lineman in all of HBCU college football, black college football this season. 6'6", 290 pounds. He already has an invitation to the Senior Bowl, so he's going to be able to showcase his talent against other FBS schools. So I'm expecting him to go out and have a really great performance. Second is Aaron Smith, the linebacker out of South Carolina State, who is an active and instinctive second-level defender. And we know with South Carolina State, they have been a pipeline of FCS talent to the NFL, whether it's Javon Hargrave, Shaquille Leonard, Jacoby Durant over the past 10 years, and even back during their glory days, back in their heydays, they had a lot of talent going into the NFL as well, and that is expected to continue with Aaron Smith. Kenny Gallup Jr., the safety out of Howard, he was a staple of that defense and has been the leader of Larry Scott's defense over the past 4 or 5 years, how long he has been in the nation's capital. And then, of course, we've talked about him plenty already, Irv Mulligan, the running back out of Jackson State, who I thought was one of the best rushers in all of HBCU football this past season. He broke Walter Payton's record, single-season rushing record of 1,139 yards. Whenever you're mentioned with sweetness, you're doing a lot of good things in your career. And then the last two players I'll mention is James Burgess, the cornerback out of Alabama State, who had a career-high 4 interceptions this season. And I cannot forget about Kendall Bowler, the cornerback out of Florida A&M, who had another magnificent season as well.
Jordan, one of the things, when you talk about the HBCUs, kind of the diamonds in the rough is what everybody's looking for. The Jacoby Durants, the guys like that, Bell, who came out of Florida A&M. Out of this class, who do you see is going to be that sleeper guy that may not get drafted as high, but you absolutely know they're going to be an NFL player?
Well, I just mentioned James Burgess, the cornerback out of Alabama State, but one I do want to mention that was not on my list is Robert McDaniel, who's a safety out of Jackson State. if you look at the box score with him, you're not going to be impressed. But if you go and just watch the film of him, you see an instinctive, a very tough player, had a couple of interceptions in the SWAC title game against Southern. He really stood out in that one. So keep an eye on Robert McDaniel, the safety out of Jackson State.
I would wholeheartedly agree with you because we got a chance to call that game and he was just all over the field. And when you walk on during pregame, he's got that size to intimidate you and make you turn your head. From your perspective, I mean, who has that untapped potential for players that you've mentioned or maybe haven't?
It would be Carson Vincent, the offensive tackle out of Alabama A&M, just because you can't teach size. But the other thing that you cannot teach with offensive linemen is physicality. Either you have it or you don't. It's kind of like accuracy with a quarterback. It's just some of those things that you cannot teach. And Carson Vincent has that physicality that you love. I'm still trying to figure out how he got out of the state of North Carolina. He passed so many HBCUs. Alabama A&M was able to steal him out of North Carolina. He's proven his worth down there for Carnell Maynor and also Dwayne Taylor's offense.
And Jordan, you mentioned something that I think probably sticks out to a lot of people. Irv Mulligan breaking Walter Payton's record. Anytime you do that, obviously you've done something pretty dang good. Who does he compare to in the NFL right now in your eyes?
The name that I kept coming back to with him was Aaron Jones of the Minnesota Vikings. He reminds me a lot of Aaron Jones. And if you remember, he was a 5th-round pick out of UTSA, a player that has gone on to experience a lot of success, not only with the Minnesota Vikings this year, but when he was drafted by the Green Bay Packers. You can use him in the passing game. Of course, you can use him in the run game, but he runs hard. That's something that really stands out about Mulligan. And he's a player that I'm really excited to see against this tough South Carolina State defense led by Aaron Smith.
And I was going to say, let me follow up on Aaron Smith. Does going to a school like South Carolina State that's had the success, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, we talk about Jacoby Durant, talk about Shaq Leonard, you can talk about Javon Hargrave. When you come from a school like that, does that really help out a guy like Aaron Smith in the eyes of the NFL scouts?
Yeah, it does, just because it's a legacy thing when you're talking about proven talent from the FCS ranks to the NFL, just because it's really hard to project those FCS players just because sometimes they could be going against 1AA talent. That's why going to an all-star game like the East-West Shrine or the Senior Bowl definitely helps, like we saw with the Javon Hargrave and with the Shaquille Leonard. They went on to have a lot of success in the NFL. So with Aaron Smith, him playing in the East-West Shrine game, I think that's going to help him a lot. And then playing against this game against Jackson State, that's another game of film that scouts will have with him.
Jordan, we appreciate the time. Tell the people before you get out of here, watching at home, where they can find you.
You can find me on Twitter or X, or whatever you call it nowadays, at Jordan_Reid. That's JORDAN_REID. And you can find all my articles of my work on ESPN.com and ESPN Plus as well.
Jordan, good to see you, QB2.
I was going to call him QB1. Don't do that.
QB1 in everybody else's heart, Jay.
QB1, baby. He's my QB1. Appreciate it, Jordan.
Thank you, guys.
Now that the season is done, let's give our final HBCU power rankings of the year. Jay, I know you like to do your Give Me 5 list, so let's do some postseason power rankings. Give us your top 5 HBCU teams of 2024.
Well, I think it's been pretty convincing. However, that's a big debate. There is a big debate because I go certain places and they get upset with me. So I think the top 2 teams are easy. South Carolina State, to me, looked the best. They had the most impressive victories, and they started winning in convincing fashion towards the end of the season. That's the mark of a great team. But how about coming in number 2, Jackson State? They're going to meet in the Celebration Bowl. So these are the top 2 teams you're going to see out there. The Fighting TC Taylors just find a way to get it done. One of the more physical teams we've seen in Jackson State in the past couple of years. I'm going to give a shout out to Eddie George and the job he did with Big Blue. Tennessee State was legit. They shared the conference championship in the Big South OVC, and they went up to Montana, and they represented the HBCU community well. That game was closer than the score ended up being. They had a chance to take the lead or tie within 4 minutes left to go in the game. They made everybody look good. That's a good ball quad. Be careful for Tennessee State. They're doing things in the right way. North Carolina Central, just a game away. If they would have beaten South Carolina State, they would have probably been in the Cricket Celebration Bowl. Trey Oliver still doing a good job. Consistency. They got the short end of the stick, not getting invited to the FCS playoffs, but the Eagles were soaring down there in Durham. And I'm going to go with Alabama State. Alabama State had a lot of expectations on them this season, projected to win the SWAC East. They came up short, but the defense was there. They've got a good defense, and Eddie Robinson Jr. has them going in the right direction there. If I'm going to put a team on the bubble, it's the team that made us all proud in the Division II playoffs, making a historic run, Virginia Union. I see you, Panthers. I'll give you a shout out for the job they were doing.
Now, Tiff, obviously, this list was created by an academic, so it's hard to be critical of it. But do your best. What do you think about Jay's list?
I think he got it right because I'll say this, Alabama State, one of the top defenses in all of FCS, and they had to deal with a lot of quarterback turnover. They played 5 quarterbacks. They had to move Kareem Key from wide receiver to quarterback to finish out the year. And so hats off rather to Eddie Robinson Jr. indeed. I think also we talk so much about Jackson State and South Carolina State, but North Carolina Central is going to be, I think, a headache next year for South Carolina State. So Trey Oliver likes to build from within and develop his talent. And so we got to see just a little glimpse of what we are in store for next year. He's got a quarterback in waiting. Walker Harris will return as well. So I think that North Carolina Central is that team. I don't actually have, and Harry, this is one of the few times I'm not actually arguing with Jay. We are in agreement. Let's time code this right now because this won't happen again for another 364 days or so.
I mean, Harry, you answered the question. Did he get it right? She just couldn't come out and say, he got it right. Nothing else to be said. I got it right.
Listen, the people at home, they know this is truly a moment in time. Mark it down. Let's do some season superlatives. I'll give you a category. You tell me who gets your award and why. Tiff, you're up first. Let's go offensive player of the year. Who you thinking?
So if you're going with what I put out since the beginning of this show, I'm giving Division II schools love. Virginia Union. Shout out to Dr. Alvin Porter and the job that they did with the Panthers, their first 2 ever playoff wins, and who helped get them there? Jada Byers, their all-time leading rusher in program history, better than 2,000 yards amassed this season. He balled out against one of the former powers in the CIAA, Bowie State, for like 324 yards on the ground, totaled 8 touchdowns altogether. Like, he was a dude and a guy that we continue to talk about throughout the season. So I'm giving love on the D2 ranks to running back from Virginia Union, Jada Byers.
Gary, can I give a little heat? Let me give a little spice.
Please.
It all starts and it all ends with the guy that touches the ball first. You got to have a quarterback. And you give me a quarterback, I'm going to give you a winner. And there's a reason why South Carolina State came in there and was cracking helmets all season long, because they had the best quarterback, period. You know, you talk about Eric Phoenix as a guy that separated that team. He came there and took the HBCU landscape by storm. The leadership, the ability to run the football. I'm just going to go back to, I never forget, when it was 3rd and 26 versus North Carolina Central. What does he do? He runs for 24 yards to make it 4th and 2 to set up so they can clinch that victory there. That type of leadership, the quick whip, the left-handed throws he makes, phenomenal player. Eric Phoenix by far was the offensive player of the year.
All right, Tiff, we gotta stop letting this guy talk about offense. Give me a defensive player of the year.
Exactly, Kelby Givens, right? SWAC defensive or player of the year along with Andrew Jones. But to me, Kelby Givens separated himself just because of the way he was a quick first step. He's always working. Terrence Graves and Henry Miller, his coaches, talked about just how much he worked and got after it. A great leader along that defensive front. Kelby Givens showed us exactly why he was that defensive player of the year in the SWAC championship game. I mean, he was just all over the place, just disruptive, one of the nation's leaders in tackles for loss along with sacks. Kelby Givens was that dude. But I love the way he went about it because it was kind of like a yeoman's work, right? Hard hat, lunch pail, just go about it, go to work and get it done.
I mean, he was that guy. Reminded me of a Robert Mathis, who's a guy that played Alabama A&M and was a disruptor in the NFL. Kelby Givens by far the defensive player of the year in my eyes.
Well, that's a great comp. And Jay, give me your team of the year. Which one of these teams really stood out to you in terms of what they did this season?
Well, give me a quarterback, give you a team. So
that's right.
You know, this was the year of the Bulldog. I mean, South Carolina State came from nowhere, you know, projected to come in 4th place in the conference by some polls. And what did they do? They went out there and they just ran through the MEAC, and they come up being the #1 team in the country. Nobody saw it coming. I'll give accolades to the Bulldogs of South Carolina State.
No, not for me there. I mean, you cannot underscore just how important Chennis Berry has been to carrying on a legacy that you saw with Buddy Pugh for his 20-plus seasons. And now he comes in first year winning a MEAC championship, has his team in the national championship game. Hey, look, Bulldogs all the way.
Tiff, that kind of leads me into our next one, Coach of the Year. Would you go with Chennis Berry there?
Absolutely. I mean, that's a no-brainer. The success that he had at his former institution, winning a couple of conference championships, taking them to the playoffs, that was one thing. But to then step up, go down the road, just about 45 minutes to take over a legendary program, a blue blood, the winningest all-time MEAC program in terms of championships, and you do that in your first year, heck yeah, 9-2, Chennis Berry all the way.
I'm going with Chennis Berry, too. If I had to vote, I'd go Chennis Berry, but it's real hard for me not to give a shout out to Eddie George. I mean, the job he did at Tennessee State. And let's not forget, Eddie George came in second for the National FCS Coach of the Year award. So I'm going Chennis Berry, but Eddie George, you deserve your props, too, for the job he did at Tennessee State.
No, without a doubt, two amazing jobs done this year. Jay, let's go game of the year, man. What do you got for me?
It's upcoming. It's upcoming. You know, we had some good games during the year, but you got the number 1 team taking on the number 2 team. This is why the Cricket Celebration Bowl was created, to have the best 2 teams from each conference battle it out, and both teams are ranked in the top 25 in all of FCS football. The game of the year is upcoming, and it's going to be the Cricket Celebration Bowl down in Atlanta.
Without a doubt. And Tiff, the biggest surprise from this season, who do you got for me?
I'm going with a guy by the name of Jamari Taylor, the running back from North Carolina Central. I mean, he was a guy who just emerged. You saw Latrell Mookie Collier have success in years past, and he waited his turn. Jamari Taylor was a guy who you just love watching. He had, Jay said it throughout the year. Every time we called his game, his patience, his running style, his vision. I mean, Jamari Taylor was just exciting to watch. He was kind of an edge of your seat rusher, and you were just waiting to see what he was going to do game after game. We saw North Carolina Central about 5 times this year, so we saw plenty of tape on Jamari Taylor, and he impressed each and every time.
Speaking of things you saw this year, one of the best things about college football and HBCU football is the atmospheres, and more specifically, the bands. We're not getting out of here without talking about the best bands that you guys saw this season. Jay, let's start off with you. Who impressed you the most this season?
I'm going to say, because you got to be careful in this area, because, we got to see the. So I'm going to say the best band performance I saw. I just witnessed in the SWAC championship. Jackson State, the Sonic Boom of the South, did a Christmas celebration that I wasn't expecting. I was not expecting, they like to talk a lot of trash and do that. It was classy, and they had All I Want for Christmas going. They had Jingle All the Way going. I'm going with the Sonic Boom of the South performance in the SWAC championship game for the Christmas celebration. It was first class.
That was indeed a fantastic performance. I mean, we were all just vibing up there, but I also have to give a shout out. I think Norfolk State's Spartan Legion did a fantastic job. They started off the year at the MEAC SWAC Challenge of the Year, and I thought they were going to just be okay against the Marching 100, if I may say so myself. But their sound was excellent. Their performance was crisp. You always talk about the precision of the bands, Jay, that you like. I think the Spartan Legion really helped to separate themselves in that game and impressed me.
All right, guys, it's time for the main event. The Cricket Celebration Bowl is a showdown between the champions of the MEAC and the SWAC conferences. This game features a rematch of the 2021 game, in which legendary coach Buddy Pugh and South Carolina State shocked the world by upsetting the 11-1 JSU Tigers, led by Coach Prime, Travis Hunter, and Shador Sanders. This is a new iteration of this game. Tiff, let's start with Jackson State and TC Taylor. He was on the sidelines as an assistant the last time they did this. What would it mean for TC to win this football game?
It would mean everything. I mean, he's making his 4th Cricket Celebration Bowl appearance, twice with Jackson State as an assistant, but also prior to that in 2016 with North Carolina Central with the aforementioned Jerry Mack at the time. TC Taylor wants this. He's wanted to put his stamp on this program ever since he took over, and we saw him last year take down Buddy Pugh in that Cricket MEAC SWAC Challenge. Chants of TC were ringing out in the stadium, and that is echoed throughout this season as well. This is a guy who is a Jackson State alum, who feels so connected to this program, a player's type of coach, and he wants to say that he belongs in that conversation of great coaches and starts that legacy now with a win on Saturday against South Carolina State.
And Jay, on the other side, Chennis Berry, I mean, you talk about replacing a legend. He could not have a better first year as the head coach at South Carolina State. The only way that he could do it is winning this football game. How much would it mean for him to win this football game, not just for this year and replacing Buddy Pugh, but for the potential future of South Carolina State football as well?
I mean, it would mean so much to him personally, because he realizes the history that goes along with coaching at South Carolina State. I mean, Willie Jeffries had a smooth transition when he gave the job to Buddy Pugh. Buddy Pugh made a smooth transition, giving the job to Chennis Berry. But they don't give you that job just expecting you to go out there and win a MEAC crown. They won the HBCU National Championship. So when Buddy Pugh's defining moment was beating Jackson State for that one, Chennis Berry says, wait, the best way to make people realize it's now my program and it's in good hands is to win the Cricket Celebration Bowl. And I think he understands what's all at stake.
Yeah, when we talk about this game, the stakes are clearly high. I mean, for both coaches, given everything that both programs have been through over the last few years. So when we talk about that, Tiff, who do you feel like, which coach is under more pressure to get it done when the Celebration Bowl finally comes up here in Atlanta?
I think it's TC Taylor, right? He's got the opportunity to do something Dion didn't, and that's win a Cricket Celebration Bowl, right? And so in order for him to create his own kind of separation and, again, show fans who are very feisty and are very passionate that he is the man to continue to lead the way, I think he's under that pressure because his fan base makes him feel that pressure game in and game out. And that's a huge load and responsibility he knew he had to assume once he took over as head coach. And now he's got to be able to deliver that on December 14th.
Jay, it always feels like when the Celebration Bowl comes around, there's usually a player or two that really stands out and makes the difference in the football game. Who's going to have to be that person for South Carolina State when this game comes up?
All eyes are going to be on the quarterback. You know, Eric Phoenix coming back offensive player of the year for the conference. But, you know, Batman's got to have a Robin. And I promise you, Jackson State is staying up at night defensively, worried about Caden High. Caden High is another one of those transfers that came over for Benedict, and he can flat out go get it. I mean, he's an offensive weapon. He was the guy, his emergence really separated this South Carolina State offense and took it to another level. Look out for Caden High, the explosive wide receiver for South Carolina State.
Tiff, who's going to be that guy for TC Taylor's team?
Well, or Mulligan, right? He is the guy who's helped to carry them and bring them there. Now, he's going to be all the more important given the fact that, you know, had a couple of quarterbacks banged up in the SWAC championship game. So being able to run the rock is something that TC Taylor said he wanted to do more of this season, a departure of what Jay mentioned earlier from what they're used to doing. And Jay also mentioned the physicality. That physicality has to be able to match up. So if they can win their matchups at the line of scrimmage and create opportunities for Irv Mulligan to have a little space or slither to run and have success on the ground, he's going to be the reason.
And Jay, this is South Carolina State's second Celebration Bowl of 4 years, Jackson State's third. Are these two programs head and shoulders above everyone else in HBCU football right now in your eyes?
They're number one and number two for a reason. So they're playing this game for a reason. Head and shoulders, you can make the argument. I mean, North Carolina Central was just a play away from being in this game as well. So I can't go head and shoulders, but are these the top two HBCU football programs right now? No question about it. No doubt about it. It's a no-brainer.
Tiff, what do you think?
I agree with you. Gosh, I got to stop saying that. That just makes me feel bad. It just doesn't feel right in my soul. But I agree. They're the top two teams, but I think there are some teams right there on the edge or the fringe that could very well be in this position.
Yeah, I'm going to get us out of here before you agree with Jay again because his head might explode. Thank you for watching the HBCU Season Recap presented by Allstate. For Jay Walker and Tiffany Green, I'm Harry Lyles. Enjoy the Celebration Bowl.